Threx's three eyes blinked in unison as the bold, glowing text on his holo terminal seemed to glare back at him: Earth survivability not recommended. The warning blinked aggressively, highlighted in the Galactic Archive's universal cautionary red. He leaned back in his hover chair, his gelatinous form rippling with confusion. Planets with such warnings were rare, usually reserved for toxic atmospheres, hostile sentient species, or catastrophic instability. And yet Earth's entry lacked the usual details. Fluctuating climate patterns, unpredictable flora and fauna, frequent seismic activity, sentient species classified as humans. Threx muttered to himself, his voice a faint musical hum as he scrolled through the sparse notes. This doesn't justify such a harsh classification. Curiosity gnawed at him. Threx wasn't just an auditor of the universal catalog, he prided himself on thoroughness. And this particular entry stank of laziness. If someone had mislabeled Earth, it was his duty to correct the error. His appendages drummed on his console as he scheduled an investigative visit. Within moments, his craft had plotted a course for this puzzling blue-green anomaly. The craft touched down in a remote, forested area of Earth where the archive assured him the dominant species lived in relative peace. Peace, Threx soon realized, was a subjective term. A deafening crack split the air as a rifle discharged nearby. Threx ducked behind his craft, his bioluminescent skin dimming instinctively. Moments later, a human figure emerged from the tree line, rifle slung over his shoulder. "Relax, it's just a warning shot," the man called out, his voice rough but not unkind. He set the rifle down and raised his hands. "Didn't know what kind of visitor you were." Threx straightened cautiously, his eye stalks swiveling to appraise the creature before him. The human was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-weathered skin and a thick layer of dust clinging to his plaid shirt. His dark hair was flecked with gray, and his expression hovered somewhere between curiosity and suspicion. "I am Threx, auditor of the Galactic Archive," the alien announced, his translator struggling slightly with the guttural tones of Earth speech. "I have come to investigate why your planet has been classified as unfit for survival." The human snorted, a sharp exhale that made Threx flinch. "Unfit for survival? Yeah, that sounds about right. I'm Matt Grayson. You found yourself the wrong guy if you're looking for cheerful postcards." He gestured toward a small cabin tucked into the woods. "Simon. If you're going to poke around Earth, you'll need a guide." Matt's cabin was as rugged as the man himself. The walls were lined with maps, tools, and photographs of wilderness landscapes. Threx hovered awkwardly in the corner, his gelatinous form quivering as Matt poured a thick, steaming liquid into a tin cup. "Coffee," Matt offered, sliding the cup across the table. Threx sniffed it cautiously before declining. "So, you're here to check out our survivability, huh? Let me guess, the hurricanes, earthquakes, and wildfires got flagged in your fancy system." "They are listed," Threx admitted, his appendages fidgeting. "Yet many worlds endure natural disasters without earning such a severe warning. I suspect there is more to this designation." Matt smirked. "Oh, there's more, all right. But let's start you off easy. I'll show you around tomorrow, nothing too crazy." The next morning, Threx floated alongside Matt as the human trudged through dense forest, a battered backpack slung over one shoulder. The air was crisp but carried an uneasy stillness. Threx's appendages twitched nervously, and he swiveled to ask Matt something when a sudden, sharp, crackling sound erupted in the distance. "Fire," Matt said, his voice low and steady. He turned, scanning the horizon until he spotted the thin plume of smoke rising skyward. "Wildfire. Looks like it's moving fast." Before Threx could respond, Matt grabbed his arm and began pulling him toward the nearest ridge. "Simon. We can't outrun it, but I know a way to stay ahead." Panic surged through Threx as he struggled to keep up. The fire was advancing with terrifying speed, its roar growing louder by the second. Embers filled the air, stinging his skin. The human, however, moved with calm precision, grabbing leaves and dirt to smother stray sparks as they ran. At one point, Matt stopped to fashion a crude breathing mask from his shirt and handed it to Threx. "This is madness," Threx wheezed, his translator straining to keep up with his frantic tones. "How do your species survive such conditions?" "By keeping our heads on straight," Matt retorted, ushering Threx into a narrow ravine. "Now, stop talking and move." They reached a shallow creek just as the flames crested the ridge. Matt shoved Threx into the water and covered them both with a damp blanket from his pack. The heat was unbearable, but it passed quickly, leaving behind a smoldering wasteland of charred trees and ash. Threx trembled as they emerged. This planet, it is chaos incarnate. Matt chuckled, brushing soot from his shirt. That's just Tuesday around here. Back at the cabin that evening, Matt shared more stories of Earth's relentless unpredictability. He spoke of tornadoes that could rip through entire towns, floods that swallowed highways, and blizzards that stranded people for weeks. And yet, he said, gesturing around the room, we're still here. We adapt, we improvise, and we survive. That's what humans do. Threx stared at the human in awe. Your species thrives amidst constant danger. It defies all logic. Yeah, well, logic doesn't get you far here, Matt replied with a smile. But if you're wondering why your archive slapped that warning on Earth, my guess is they didn't want the rest of the galaxy dealing with us. We're not exactly easy neighbors. Threx considered this, his appendages curling thoughtfully. Perhaps the warning wasn't about Earth's natural dangers after all. Perhaps it was a warning about the humans themselves, a species too resilient, too unpredictable, and too stubborn to be easily understood. Fascinating, Threx murmured, already planning his report. Threx's ocular membranes tightened in alarm as they approached the edge of the nearby town. From his vantage point atop Matt's rattling, exhaust-spewing vehicle, why did humans still use combustion engines? The landscape ahead looked less like a coordinated settlement and more like a chaotic experiment in urban endurance. Buildings jutted up at odd angles, wires sagged dangerously low between poles, and moving objects of various sizes pivoted unpredictably along the narrow pathways that Matt insisted on calling roads. This cannot be intentional, Threx blurted, his gelatinous body flattening against the truck's roof as Matt swerved to avoid a bicyclist balancing a pyramid of boxes. Your infrastructure lacks coherence. Are those energy conduits supposed to dangle so precariously? Matt leaned out the driver's side window, waving an apology at the cyclist before glancing up at the sagging wires. They've been like that for years, they'll hold? Will they? Threx's tone edged toward incredulity. There appears to be no standardization. The angles of your structures are inconsistent, your pathways intersect chaotically, and the proximity of your domiciles to volatile energy sources. Relax, buddy, Matt interrupted with a grin. It's not as bad as it looks. Well, most of the time. Threx's skepticism deepened as they rolled into the heart of the town. Humans bustled about in every direction, seemingly oblivious to the potential hazards surrounding them. A child dashed across the street, narrowly avoiding a honking vehicle. A stray cat perched on a precariously balanced trash can, its presence tilting the bin dangerously close to spilling. Above, a utility worker dangled from a pole, sparks flying as they fiddled with an exposed wire. This is madness, Threx muttered, his eye stalk swiveling furiously to catalog every glaring inefficiency and hazard. How does your species tolerate such chaos? Matt parked the truck by a diner with a flickering neon sign and climbed out, slamming the door behind him. Tolerate it? We don't just tolerate it, we thrive on it. Come on, I'll show you. He beckoned Threx toward the diner, where the smell of frying meat wafted invitingly. Before Threx could protest, the sky above darkened with unsettling speed. Heavy clouds rolled in, blotting out the sun, and a low rumble of thunder reverberated through the air. Matt paused mid-step, glancing upward. Oh. That's coming in fast. What's coming? Threx asked, his skin rippling in agitation. Storm, Matt said simply. Looks like a bad one. The first fat raindrop splattered against the pavement as the wind picked up, sending loose debris skittering across the street. Within moments, the town was plunged into chaos. The power lines that had so concerned Threx sparked ominously before going dark, plunging the diner and surrounding buildings into an eerie twilight. People shouted to one another over the rising howl of the wind, and the streets began to empty as humans sought shelter. Matt, however, sprang into action. Simon, he shouted, motioning for Threx to follow him. We gotta help out. Help out? Threx hesitated, his gelatinous form quivering in confusion. Was it not every being for themselves in such situations? But Matt was already sprinting toward a group of humans struggling to secure a tarp over a stack of supplies. With surprising efficiency, he grabbed a length of rope and began tying the tarp down, shouting instructions over the wind. Threx watched in bewilderment as Matt moved from group to group, helping wherever he was needed. He carried sandbags to reinforce a low-lying storefront, distributed flashlights and candles from the town's general store, and even took charge of organizing a makeshift shelter in the diner for stranded residents. The storm raged on, but the humans seemed undeterred. They worked together with a kind of unspoken coordination, adapting to each new challenge as it arose. By the time the worst of the storm had passed, the diner was filled with damp but grateful townsfolk, sharing stories and splitting rations with surprising good humor. Threx sat in a corner, observing the scene with wide-eyed amazement. "Your species is." "Perplexing," he said as Matt slid into the booth across from him, wiping rainwater from his face. "Despite the disarray of your environment, you exhibit remarkable adaptability. It is as if you thrive on adversity." Matt grinned, cracking open a can of soda he'd salvaged from the store. "Yeah, that's kinda our thing. Life throws a curveball, we figure it out, no big deal." Threx's eye stalks swiveled toward the window, where the aftermath of the storm was still evident: fallen branches, scattered debris, and the occasional flicker of distant lightning. "It is difficult to comprehend. Why not eliminate the sources of such adversity? Surely a more controlled environment would be preferable." Matt shrugged. "Maybe. But where's the fun in that?" Threx was about to respond when a sudden movement outside caught his attention. A small, four-legged creature with matted fur and a lolling tongue trotted through the debris, sniffing at overturned trash bins. It spotted the diner's open door and bounded inside, shaking water from its fur. "What is that?" Threx yelped, recoiling as the creature padded up to him, tail wagging. Matt laughed. "That's just a dog. Harmless. Well, mostly." The dog sniffed at Threx with intense curiosity, its wet nose leaving smudges on the alien's translucent skin. Threx recoiled further, his appendages curling protectively. "This organism invaded your domicile without provocation. Is it not a threat?" "Only to your sandwich," Matt said, scratching the dog behind its ears. "Relax, Threx. Not all Earth's animals are out to get you." "Not all," Threx echoed, his tone alarmed. "You mean to say some are?" "Oh sure," Matt said casually. "We've got venomous snakes, bears, mountain lions, sharks. Oh, and don't forget the mosquitoes. Those little bloodsuckers will drive you nuts." Threx stared at him, aghast. "Your planet's fauna is as unpredictable as its climate. Does nothing here conform to logic?" Matt leaned back, grinning. "Earth isn't for the faint-hearted, my friend. But you gotta admit, it's got character." Character. Threx mulled over the word as he watched the townsfolk clean up after the storm, their laughter and camaraderie cutting through the lingering gloom. Despite the chaos, there was a resilience here, a tenacity that defied reason. For the first time, Threx began to see a pattern. Earth's challenges were not merely environmental but woven into the very fabric of its inhabitants. It was as if humanity thrived on chaos, drawing strength from adversity and finding unity in the face of unpredictability. Perhaps the Galactic Archive's warning had been correct, after all. Earth was not unfit for survival, at least, not for those unwilling to embrace its unique madness. "No," Threx said flatly, his voice a strange mix of defiance and terror. "Absolutely not. I refuse." Matt leaned against the doorframe of the regional medical center, arms crossed and a bemused smile tugging at his lips. "You wanted to understand how we survived this wild, dangerous rock, didn't you? Well, this is a big part of it." "I did not anticipate being forced into one of your overcrowded, germ-ridden facilities," Threx shot back, his gelatinous form quivering as his eye stalks swiveled toward the double doors. Through the glass, the emergency room buzzed with frantic energy. People on stretchers were rushed past, shouting, nurses and uniformed paramedics, their faces pale and drawn. Others slumped in chairs, holding ice packs to swollen limbs or pressing bloodied rags to their foreheads. Matt pushed the door open, beckoning Threx inside. "Come on. You wanted to see how we handle injuries and diseases caused by this reckless environment of ours. This is where it happens." Reluctantly, Threx floated through the door, his appendages drawn protectively close to his translucent body. The chaos within was unlike anything he had encountered before. Humans of all ages filled the room, their expressions ranging from pain to panic. A child wailed inconsolably as a nurse wrapped his arm in gauze. A man in a neon vest limped past with a jagged piece of metal embedded in his leg. Two women argued loudly over who had arrived first, their voices cutting through the din. "This is horrifying," Threx muttered, his eye stalks swiveling rapidly. "What is the source of all this injury and illness? Are you under attack?" "Not exactly," Matt replied, steering him toward the triage desk. He gestured toward a man cradling his arm, which was bent at an unnatural angle. That guy fell off a ladder. Threx blinked, perplexed. A ladder? One of your primitive climbing devices caused this. Yep, Matt said cheerfully. He pointed to a woman being wheeled past with a heavily bandaged foot. She dropped a cast-iron skillet on herself. Threx recoiled. Your cooking implements are hazardous as well. Oh, it gets better. See that guy over there? Matt nodded toward a teenager with a sheepish expression and a hand wrapped in a makeshift bandage. Tried to use a knife to open a can of beans. Threx's appendages twitched violently. This is absurd. Are all humans this clumsy and careless? Matt shrugged. We're a creative bunch. Sometimes things don't go as planned. Before Threx could respond, a brisk, confident voice cut through the noise. Matt Grayson, what on earth are you doing here? And who's your friend? They turned to see a sharply dressed woman striding toward them, her white coat pristine despite the chaos surrounding her. She carried herself with an air of authority, her sharp blue eyes locking onto Threx with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Dr. Sorensen, Matt greeted, flashing her a grin. Got someone here who's curious about how we humans keep from falling apart. Thought you'd be the best person to show him. Dr. Emily Sorensen raised an eyebrow, her gaze sweeping over Threx's unusual form. I'd say falling apart is exactly what we do best. But if you're interested in how we put the pieces back together, you've come to the right place. She extended a hand toward Threx. Dr. Emily Sorensen, trauma surgeon. Threx hesitated before extending an appendage, which she shook without missing a beat. I am Threx, auditor of the Galactic Archive, he said stiffly. I am here to understand how your species survives on this perilous planet. Well, Threx, you've picked quite the day for it, Dr. Sorensen said, motioning for them to follow her. Let me show you what we've got. She led them through the bustling emergency room, narrating as they went. This is where we handle the immediate stuff: broken bones, lacerations, heart attacks, you name it. Humans are fragile in a lot of ways, but we've gotten pretty good at patching ourselves up. Threx's eye stalks swiveled toward a man groaning as a nurse stitched a deep gash on his arm. Your methods appear rudimentary. Dr. Sorensen smiled. That's just the start. Come with me. She took them to a sterile, brightly lit room where a team of doctors and nurses worked around a patient whose chest was being compressed rhythmically by a machine. Tubes and monitors surrounded the bed, beeping urgently. Cardiac arrest, Dr. Sorensen said. The heart stops and the blood stops flowing. Without intervention, the brain dies in minutes. But we've developed techniques to restart it. That machine? It's performing chest compressions better than any human could. Threx observed the scene, his gelatinous form rippling with awe. You possess devices capable of restoring life. Sometimes, Dr. Sorensen replied. Doesn't always work, but when it does, it's a second chance. They moved on to another room, where a young woman lay unconscious, her leg encased in a metallic frame. Severe trauma from a car accident, Dr. Sorensen explained. We've stabilized her spine, set her broken bones, and we're monitoring for internal bleeding. She's not out of the woods yet, but she's got a fighting chance. Threx's appendages twitched uncertainly. Your vehicles are a source of injury as well. Everything's a source of injury if you're not careful, Dr. Sorensen said sharply. But that's not the point. The point is that no matter how bad it gets, we find ways to fix it. She led them to a glass case displaying intricate medical devices. These are some of our more advanced tools. Artificial hearts, prosthetic limbs, robotic surgical assistants. We've even developed techniques to grow organs in labs. When the body fails, we don't give up. We find solutions. Threx stared at the devices, his eye stalks wide. Your species is remarkably resourceful, he admitted grudgingly. Yet your propensity for self-inflicted harm remains baffling. Dr. Sorensen crossed her arms, fixing Threx with a piercing gaze. Let me tell you something, Threx. We humans don't just survive. We adapt, we innovate, and we do it faster than you can blink. Every injury, every disease, every disaster, it pushes us to find new ways to overcome. That's how we've made it this far. Matt leaned against the wall, a proud grin on his face. Told you, Threx, we're a stubborn bunch. Threx fell silent, his appendages curling thoughtfully. Watching the humans work, he saw not just chaos but determination. Their world was unpredictable, their bodies fragile, and yet they persisted through ingenuity, collaboration, and sheer willpower. As they left the medical center, Threx turned to Matt. "Your species is absurdly reckless," he said, "but you are also astonishingly resilient. I am beginning to understand why your planet is classified as unfit for survival. It is not the environment that is unfit, it is the very nature of your existence." Matt laughed, clapping Threx on the back. "And yet, here we are." Threx's bioluminescent skin flickered thoughtfully. Perhaps, he mused, Earth's greatest danger was also its greatest strength, its humans. The morning air was biting, crisp enough to sting even Threx's normally temperature-resistant surface. He huddled deeper into the insulated cloak Matt had insisted he wear as they climbed out of the truck. Before them stretched a jagged expanse of snow-covered peaks, their icy crowns glittering under the weak sunlight. The wind howled through the valleys like some unseen predator, its icy breath sending shivers rippling through Threx's gelatinous form. "This," Matt announced with a grin that Threx could only describe as reckless, "is where we're going." Threx stared at the mountain range, his eye stalks narrowing in disbelief. "You intend to ascend this inhospitable terrain? Voluntarily?" "Well, yeah," Matt said, tightening the straps of his backpack. "Beautiful, isn't it?" "No," Threx said flatly, his appendages curling protectively. "It is a frozen wasteland designed to repel sentient life. Why would anyone subject themselves to this?" "Because it's a challenge," Matt replied, his grin widening. "And because you wanted to see how we deal with the harshest conditions Earth has to offer. Welcome to the mountains, Threx." Before Threx could lodge another protest, Matt hefted his pack and started up a narrow trail. Threx hesitated, glancing back at the relative safety of the truck, but curiosity or perhaps sheer bewilderment propelled him forward. He floated after Matt, his cloak flapping awkwardly in the wind. The climb was grueling. The higher they went, the thinner the air became, and Threx found himself struggling to maintain his usual buoyancy. The trail narrowed to precarious ledges, where one misstep could send them plummeting into icy chasms. Snow whipped around them in relentless gusts, clinging to Threx's cloak and forming a frosty crust on his exposed surface. Matt, however, moved with practiced ease. He navigated the treacherous terrain with the confidence born of experience, pausing occasionally to check on Threx or point out some feature of the landscape. "See that ridge over there?" He called over the wind. "That's where we'll set up camp for the night. Should give us some decent shelter." "Shelter?" Threx echoed, his voice tinged with alarm. "You intend for us to remain here overnight? In these conditions?" "Yep," Matt said cheerfully. "Don't worry, I've got everything we need." Threx was far from reassured. As they reached the ridge, the weather took a sudden, ominous turn. The wind intensified, carrying with it a blinding torrent of snow. Visibility dropped to mere feet, and the temperature plummeted further. Threx's translator struggled to convey his rising panic as he shouted, "This is unsustainable. We must return immediately." "Not an option," Matt yelled back, his voice barely audible over the gale. "We wouldn't make it back to the truck in this. Gotta hunker down and wait it out." With astonishing speed and efficiency, Matt began constructing a makeshift shelter. He used a small collapsible shovel to carve out a hollow in the snow, creating a windbreak. From his pack, he produced a thermal blanket, a compact stove, and a waterproof tarp, which he secured with stakes driven into the frozen ground. Threx watched in stunned silence as Matt transformed the inhospitable ridge into a marginally survivable haven. When Matt motioned for him to crawl inside, Threx hesitated. "This contraption cannot possibly protect us." "Trust me," Matt said, his tone firm but reassuring. "It's not luxury, but it'll do the job." Reluctantly, Threx complied. Inside, the shelter was cramped but surprisingly warm. The stove emitted a faint, comforting glow as Matt boiled water for something he called instant soup. The smell was oddly comforting, though Threx declined when offered a portion. For a long time, they sat in silence, the howling blizzard outside forming a stark contrast to the relative calm within. Threx finally broke the quiet. "You have done this before." "More times than I can count," Matt replied, stirring his soup. "I grew up with mountains like these in my backyard." Threx's eye stalks swiveled toward him. "Why would anyone choose to reside in such a perilous environment?" Matt's smile faded slightly, and he stared into his steaming cup. "It wasn't just a choice. My dad loved the mountains. He said they kept him honest. Taught him how small we are, you know. how to respect the forces we can't control. Threx tilted his head, intrigued by the uncharacteristic solemnity in Matt's voice. Your father, did he teach you these survival techniques? Yeah, Matt said softly. He taught me everything. How to read the weather, how to find shelter, how to keep going even when it felt impossible. Threx sensed there was more to the story, but he waited, letting Matt speak at his own pace. One winter, Matt continued, his voice quieter now, we were out in the mountains when an avalanche hit. Came out of nowhere. We'd been careful, but sometimes careful isn't enough. Threx's appendages curled slightly, a gesture of empathy. He did not survive. Matt shook his head. No. But what he taught me did. It's why I'm still here. And it's why I bring people up here now. To show them what these mountains can do, and to teach them how to respect it. For a moment, the only sound was the wind outside, its mournful wail carrying a weight that Threx couldn't fully comprehend. Your resilience, he said finally, is not merely a matter of physical endurance. It is born of something deeper, something emotional. Matt looked up, his expression unreadable. Yeah, I guess you could say that. The blizzard raged on through the night, but Matt's shelter held firm. Threx found himself marveling at the human's ingenuity and composure under such extreme conditions. He realized that it wasn't just the tools or the techniques that made survival possible, it was the mindset. The refusal to give up, no matter how dire the circumstances. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the mountains blanketed in a fresh layer of snow. The sky was a piercing blue, and the air was so crisp it almost felt clean. Threx floated to the edge of the ridge, his eye stalks swiveling to take in the breathtaking view. The world stretched out before him, vast and untamed. Matt joined him, a satisfied smile on his face. See? Told you it was worth it. Threx didn't respond immediately. He was too busy processing the paradox before him. This planet, with all its chaos and dangers, should have been uninhabitable. And yet, its dominant species didn't just survive, they thrived, finding beauty and meaning in the very challenges that should have driven them away. When they finally descended and returned to the truck, Threx felt a strange sense of clarity. The Galactic Archive's warning wasn't wrong, but it wasn't right either. Earth wasn't dangerous because it was uninhabitable. It was dangerous because humans had made it their home. Back aboard his craft, Threx filed his report. In it, he detailed Earth's extreme conditions and humanity's astonishing adaptability. He left the survivability not recommended warning intact, not as a condemnation, but as a testament. As his report transmitted to the Galactic Archive, Threx murmured to himself, Earth isn't dangerous because of what it is. It's dangerous because of who they are, and for the first time since beginning his assignment, Threx felt he truly understood